Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I feel honored to be part of the Secret Word for the reading program. So that's pretty cool. So we are going to be talking about Instant Pot tonight. We're going to be cooking the recipe as I teach the class. This recipe is a little bit more involved than a lot of them that I teach in the in my library classes, but it has a lot of good techniques in it, and it's a good recipe, so I think we'll have fun with it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then we're going to get right into the parts. We're going to get right into the recipe, and then we're going to back up and kind of talk about the parts of the Instant Pot, of the pressure cooker. We will talk about safety features, how to maintain it, and just generally how the pot works. And then we will finish up talking recipes. So as I get started, let me remember, if you have questions as we're going through the class, feel free to type them into the chat. I can follow that along as we are going, and I will try to keep up with it. So if you have something that helps clarify or anything like that as we're going along, feel free to put that in the chat, and I will try my best to catch it. Otherwise, we will catch up with all of those towards the end of the class. Let me see a little bit about myself. I am an engineer by training. I grew up in Iowa on a small family farm, grew up with my mom and grandma in their kitchens. My mother was actually a home ec instructor, so I have an unfair advantage over a lot of people in terms of my background and cooking skills taught from her and my grandmother. So I went to school, like I said, for engineering, but came out here for a job after school. I have 4 little boys at home, and not so little anymore. My oldest is 14 and my youngest is 7. After the 3rd one was born, the engineering job didn't make a whole lot of sense anymore. But about a week after quitting that job, it occurred to me that I needed a little bit more going on. So that has evolved into this little business that I call my Kitchen Clatter, where I basically teach classes. I tell people it's the type of stuff that your mom or grandmother knew how to do, but because of all of the things that happened in the women's movement and stuff, a lot of us didn't get taught. We're not taught how to do those things ourselves. So we have a kind of a gap in knowledge, I think, sometimes. So I try to teach those things. Pressure cooking is one of them. My goal is generally to help people figure out easy ways to cut out some processed foods here and there in their lifestyles. I know not everybody is home cooking as much as I do. The Instant Pot is a wonderful way to save time, save energy, get a healthy meal on the table without a lot of fuss, and can be one of those techniques to use to not use processed foods, not have to go to McDonald's, all of those sorts of things. So I teach this class, assuming that you may not already have one. So we're going to talk about all the basics and what to look for in one when you are buying one. And that's kind of how we're going to approach the class. If you decide you like what I'm doing here and you want to know more about what I'm doing, feel free to find me at my Kitchen Clatter. I think it's on the recipe that you were given with the class. And you'll find more Instant Pot recipes, the ones I teach at other libraries. I have a newsletter where I share all of these free classes that I've been teaching virtually. So I am doing a ton of canning and preserving classes this summer. So if you're interested in those things, I also do bread baking and all of that sort of stuff. Okay, that is way more than I like to talk about myself. So without any more ado, we will go right into the recipe tonight. So I am going to go ahead and get us started right away using the pressure cooker and showing you the features of it. And then I have separate parts. I have an extra insert and an extra lid sitting on the side so that we can use those as this one's cooking. I will demonstrate and show you some things with the spare parts that I have sitting to the side. So what I am doing here is I am going to switch my camera view so you can see the front of this pot, because I realize you cannot see it very well from where you are at. So this is the front of the pot. This is an Instant Pot Duo. If you are looking at a different brand of pressure cooker, they all basically work the same. I have Instant Pots in my house, in my kitchen. I've had good luck with them. I generally like how they work. But if you have a different brand or are looking at a different brand, just know that they all pretty much have the similar features. We'll talk about things that vary even between different models of Instant Pot. But when I say Instant Pot, I mean electric pressure cooker. So any brand that you have, they're all going to work essentially the same. So likewise, if you see recipes that say Instant Pot on them, you can just assume that those will work in your other brand pressure cooker also. So do not feel like you have to get an Instant Pot because it's the name that's out there. So what I'm gonna do here, the two settings, and we'll talk about all of the settings later, but the two settings that I use the most are saute and pressure cook. The rest of these settings are just pre-programmed settings, essentially, for the pot. The rice button is nice, and I do use that. But other than that, what you're gonna do when you start with your cooker is you're gonna push this pressure button. Mine is fussing with me. If I hit pressure cook, and I hit that, and I'm sorry if it goes in and out of focus. I'm gonna try not to move my fingers much. If you hit pressure level a couple times, you can see here that it toggles between low pressure and high pressure. You generally want it at high pressure. So once you get it set to high pressure, it will, that's where you're gonna use it at all of the time. And then I'm gonna start this recipe using the saute setting. And if I toggle between this button, this moves between less, normal, and more. And so what you wanna do, I usually keep it at normal. If you, this guy gets really hot. And so if you are, I hit cancel again. It takes a couple seconds and then it goes into the cycle if you don't hit cancel. So they get really hot when you're on the saute setting. So just be aware of that. I usually don't use the high. I'm usually wandering around my kitchen and it's a guaranteed way to burn or brown things too quickly. So what we're doing with the recipe, the first step on this one is we're just gonna toss the chicken with a seasoned flour. That's all it is. So there's a tablespoon of flour. There's, the recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of kosher salt, and it's divided. So you're gonna put half of the teaspoon or half a teaspoon of the kosher salt in with the flour. There is half a teaspoon of Italian seasoning, also divided. So put half of that in with the flour. I put in a 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder, and then 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground pepper. And so you just toss those together and then toss the chicken. I have 3 chicken thighs in here. If your chicken package came with more, with like 4 or 5 chicken thighs, you can absolutely do this recipe with all 5 of them. You might want to increase your flour a little bit, but honestly, you probably don't even need to do that. So what this is doing is this is going to season your chicken a little bit. And it's also that flour is going to allow is going to help thicken the sauce when this all cooks together. So that flour in there will cook kind of, it's not going to make a gravy per se here, but it's going to help keep the sauce a little bit thicker. If you're gluten-free, because I always get this question, you can totally substitute a gluten-free flour into this, I think. I am not gluten-free, but that generally will work. So you could do that. So I think that's a question I get sometimes. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit that saute button like we just did. And then I am going to switch cameras again. All we're gonna do here, I'm gonna show you it from above. So this is the insert of the pot. While it's heating up, we'll talk a little bit about that. The insert has to be in the pot for it to work. If I take the pot out, the insert out, there's a weighted a weight in the bottom, and it'll just shut itself off, and it won't heat. There won't be anything happening if you don't have this insert in. So you always want the insert in the pot. Obviously, you don't want to dump food accidentally into the bottom without the insert in. On the Instant Pot models, the insert is almost always stainless steel. I have had very good luck with the stainless steel inserts. They clean up very well for me, and I've been very happy with them. But there are some brands out there. I've even heard of Instant Pot having so there are a couple models that have a non-stick insert, so you can look for those if you are interested. I'm just going to hold my hand in there. I'm going to let that get hot. I poured in a tablespoon of olive oil. I feel like I said that already. And we're going to let this warm up and get hot. And while that's warming, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the insert. You can maybe kind of see this on the side. Most of these inserts have a marking at halfway full and a marking at 2/3 full. So your marking at halfway full is your maximum capacity of the pot if you are cooking things that are foaming, that foam or expand while they cook. So if you are doing beans or grains, you will want to fill your pot no more than halfway full for those sorts of things. So that's beans and grains. Apples, if you wanted to do applesauce in the Instant Pot, they foam a lot. You do not want to fill that more than halfway full. You would do that for applesauce. Those are your main things that are at the halfway. And then it has a marking at the top that says 2/3, and this one it says PC max at 2/3. So that is your maximum filling capacity of your pressure cooker. Your pressure cookers work under pressure. You always have to have some liquid in your pressure cooker. So that is rule number one with your cooker. When you want it to come up to pressure, you have to have, usually it's a minimum rule of thumb is 1 cup of liquid in the cooker. So you don't, what happens then, but you cannot have more than 2/3 full of liquid in the pressure cooker. So this is just lovely to watch raw chicken fry, but I'm just gonna show you how they're set up. So they're in the oil. We're gonna let them brown a bit. We don't need to watch that. You can look at me instead, but that's what that looks like in there. So you have to have at least 1 cup of liquid in your recipe and no more than 2/3 full in the pressure cooker. So what's happening in the pressure cooker is the liquid, when it is sealed in the sealed container, it comes, let's back up. When you're boiling water or any liquid, without it being sealed, it boils at about 212 degrees. So on the stovetop, you get a boiling point of 212 degrees here in Chicago. If we put the lid on this and seal that liquid in there, the liquid, the molecules don't have anywhere to evaporate off. So when it's heated and some of the liquid evaporates, those molecules have nowhere to go off to, and they basically bounce around inside of the pressure cooker and create pressure within your pressure cooker. And that allows the liquid to boil at a higher temperature than it would if the unit was not under a sealed condition. So you get a higher boiling point, which is what allows a pressure cooker to cook quicker than doing these sorts of things on the stovetop. But so if you think about it, your liquid has to have somewhere to move for those evaporated molecules to bounce around in. So that's why you can't go more than 2/3 full in your pressure cooker. If you try to do that, you won't be able to come up to pressure. So if you don't have any liquid in there or not enough, or you have too much liquid in there, it won't be able to come up to pressure. And that'll be a source of an error. If it's not coming to pressure, that's the first thing you want to do is check to see that you have enough liquid or not too much liquid in the pot. And then the other thing you want to do if you're having problems with it coming to pressure is you want to double check that your lid is on properly and that the seal, the gasket within the lid is in there correctly. So these are going to brown for, we're going to give them a couple more minutes on this side and then we're going to brown the other side. So we'll talk about the lid a little bit. The lid, you have this gasket inside of the lid. It's a silicone gasket and it goes into your lid around, there's on the Instant Pot brands, there's a wire ring here that it fits into. So you want to make sure that that is in there. This is how I store my lids. I store them with the gasket in there. So I can put it right onto the pot and have it ready to go. It also helps me so I don't lose it somewhere in the house and not have the gasket when I want to cook a recipe. And also, if it's sitting on the sink after being washed and doesn't get put in the lid, what will happen is your pot will not come to pressure. It'll keep trying and it just will never get up to pressure. And so that's another place to check and see, is that gasket in the pot? Is it inserted correctly? So that's another thing to check, that your lid is on correctly. So I'm gonna flip these guys over. This is really just browning them for color, because within the Instant Pot, you don't get things will not get crispy. So it's not a good way to cook things that you want crispy. Things also don't get real brown, but the nice part is that you're able to, you are able to get them to brown within the pot. So different than a crock pot, these are, this is actually brown here. It doesn't look brown on the camera, but that is brown and not red. So it's different from a crock pot because this can heat up and do the browning within the pot, which is really nice, I think. So we're gonna let the second side brown. I am gonna put this bowl away that had the uncooked chicken in it, and I'm just gonna grab out a clean bowl for the brown chicken, although this is the chicken's gonna get cooked again with the pasta, so I probably could just use the same bowl. So the lid is, there is a topper on the top of the lid. Maybe I'll do this on the close-up camera. I'll just hold this. I think this will work. So on top of the lid, I'm holding this up above the steam below it. This is the little bobble, the black bobble. And it moves, it says sealing, or this one says venting, and this one says sealing. So you can move it between venting and sealing. So you want this always to sealing when you're trying to come up to pressure. That's another place to check. So if you are trying to bring something to pressure and you are getting steam coming, this is where the steam comes out. If a bunch of steam is coming out of this instead of the pot coming up to pressure, you want to double check that this is at this is set to steaming and not to the venting. The other part of the lid, I'll check this real quick so I don't, okay, it's got a little ways to go, is on the bottom. This white piece is the bottom side of this button that goes up and down. On this, that is your pressure indicator, and it is a visual pressure indicator. So in addition to the front of the pot, where you have the control panel that can sometimes, it kind of depends on the model, this pressure indicator will come up when it is at pressure. So that's something to be aware of. And then the other thing that's on here is this is covered. This is the backside of this. If you pop the cover off on the bottom, and it's very hard to get off, I'm going to do that off camera. Use the edge of a knife or something. Under this is what's under here is protected. There's a hole through there. And if you look up and look through this at the light, you should be able to see light through this hole. So this hole goes from the bottom of the pot to the top of the pot, and that is the venting and the pressure release. You want to check that. If you have foods that foamed up, we'll talk about it more later, but if you do oatmeal and you open the pressure up too quickly, for instance, sometimes you'll get some oatmeal that will come out through that hole and it'll be a mess. After that happens, you want to take all of these, the cover off on the bottom, the top off, and run a pipe cleaner or a wire brush through that hole to make sure that that's clean. Because that's another spot where if you're having problems coming up to pressure, that's another place to look for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the chicken out and just set them in this bowl. I'm going to show you what it looks like in there. So what we have now is we have this. I love to show the browning feature of the pot because it sticks a little bit on the bottom when you do the browning. But browning is awesome to be able to do in the same pot and only get one pot dirty. But in an Instant Pot, if you have brown bits stuck on there, you want to deglaze the pan and make sure that they that these brown bits come off. First, we're going to add this. We're going to add the onion. I have a chopped up, a sliced onion and a sliced green pepper. And we're going to just stir them a little bit in there. And then right towards the end, we're gonna get those sauteed a bit. And right towards the end of those, we're going to add the garlic. And then we are going to add a little bit of that wine. Well, I think it's half a cup of red or white wine. And we're gonna use the wine. We're gonna pour that wine in there. It's gonna be hot, and that will cook basically, and all of those little sticky things on there will come off with the wine, and then we will have a clean bottom pot. If you don't, and that's called deglazing. If you don't deglaze this pot and you leave all of those brown bits on there when you set it to the pressure cooking setting, it will you will get an error. It comes up usually as a burn error, and it will turn itself off and start flashing burn. And so the easiest way to avoid that is just to make sure that you deglaze the bottom of the pot before you add all of the ingredients and before you set it to pressure cooking. So I just want to do it now, but I'm going to let that onion cook a little bit and let it do its thing so that the onion browns and gets a bit of flavor and the pepper in there. And then we'll add the garlic right at the end of sauteing the peppers and onions. The garlic cooks really quick and it doesn't need the 4 minutes or so that the onion and bell pepper need. So with this, I usually just add it right at the end, 15 or 30 seconds, just until you can smell it. And then we'll add the half a cup of wine, deglaze the bottom of the pot. And then we're ready to dump everything into the pot. We'll add the chicken back in. We'll add the pasta, some water, and some pasta sauce. And then we will put the lid onto the pot and let it do its thing for pressure cooking. We'll switch from the saute setting, and then we'll go into the pressure cooking setting. So we talked about the lid. We talked about getting the seal correct on the lid. And we talked about making sure that the bottle pot part of the lid is set to sealing and not to venting. Instant Pot and other brands, there are several different lids with different models. So some lids do this automatically, as or always go to sealing when you lock it onto the pot, which is a great feature. It's not necessary. I teach the class with this one because the dual model, this is how I think they're still selling most of them. And it's good to know that if you have this is like the basic lid. The other thing, so this is getting really brown in here. I think we're pretty good. I'm just gonna switch the camera. The other thing you wanna look at is the size of the pot. So what I am working with, well now I forget which camera switch. So I'm just gonna add the garlic quick. Most of the pots that are on the market are 6 or 8 quart pots. I am cooking in a 6 quart. This is the pot I use most of the time. So things are getting really brown in here. That's perfect. It's gonna add flavor. What we're gonna do is add a little, the half a cup. It's probably gonna steam up. If it steams up too much on the camera, I will switch the camera. So that's half a cup of wine. And I am just taking my spat. I like to do this with a wooden spoon, but you can do this with anything. The saute setting is still on the pot, so I still have the heat going. And I'm just taking the wooden spoon and using it to unstick all of those little brown bits. Those are gonna be all the flavor, a ton of flavor to your sauce and to your chicken and to your recipe. So otherwise they end up burning on the bottom and not doing any good for anyone. So it cleans up that easy. And I think the recipe says to try to let most of that wine evaporate in here. I probably added, no, I did good. I added pretty close to what was in the recipe. So we'll just let that simmer a tiny bit. And then what we're gonna do is basically, now we're to the fun part where we just dump everything in and turn off the saute setting, turn it to pressure cook, and let it do all of the rest of the cooking of the recipe. Once it is set to pressure cook, things very rarely actually stick in the pot. So I use the Instant Pot for my, for example, I use it for my steel cut oats, which if I do, there we go. Now it's steaming up my camera. If we do it for steel cut oats, if I do steel cut oats on the stovetop, I end up having to, I'd say most of that's evaporated now. So let me show you how I switch the settings. If I do my steel cut oats on the stovetop in a pan, I have to stir them nonstop almost so they don't stick in the pan and they don't clump up. If you do your steel cut oats in the Instant Pot, they will, you just put your oats and your water in the pot, set it to pressure cook, and they come out perfectly. No lumps, nothing. When it's all done, you stir them up and combine the water and the liquid, and you end up with perfectly cooked steel cut oats. It's amazing. So how I get off of the saute setting is I just hit cancel, and that gets me out of the saute setting. And now at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in all of the rest of the ingredients back into the pot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the chicken back in. I'm going to put the, yeah, I don't know. You maybe could just put the chicken in right on the top, but I obviously just dumped it all in. I have a handful of pasta, which I don't know how I did that. I have some chopped up roasted red peppers. I have 1.75 cups of water. So that's important because if you did this as the liquid only with the chicken broth, or I mean, sorry, only with the pasta sauce, it would be too thick and possibly too much sugar to it. Even the sugars from the tomato sauce itself would be too, they would end up sticking into the bottom. That's one time where it does stick. So you have that extra liquid in there. And also because we're cooking the pasta in it, you need the extra water to help cook the pasta. So, and I just put 8 ounces of pasta in there and I'll show you what it looks like. And I think it says to put the rest of your, put the rest of your salt and the rest of your Italian seasoning in there. I have to find the poor Italian seasoning got lost. So dump those all in. So we have every ingredient in there now, except for the arugula, which is actually still in my refrigerator now that I'm thinking about it. But just stir that up, and then we're gonna put the lid on. This is how the lid works. So if you look at the back of the pot, this is the front side is where the display is, and the back side has this cutout on it. The back side matches with this part of the lid. And so you set this at an angle so the tabs on your lid are at an angle to the handles, and you set it down like that. The Instant Pot will sing when it does that. And so you have your handles kind of opposite, but this is sitting on to the edge of the back. And then you can give it a little bit, like 1/8 of a turn, and it'll sing again. And now your handles are aligned, and this is set up at the other edge of this, and then of this pop out at the back. And then you want to make sure that this is set back to sealing. And then we'll go back and look at the front of the pot. If we go to the front of the pot, what we're going to do here is we're going to play with the pressure level. So I don't use these settings very often, if ever. I will use that rice setting on the right side, but other than that, I don't use any of these 8 buttons on the top. I rarely have ever used the slow cook. I use that saute. I will use delay. I never change the pressure level from high. I always have it on high. The keep warm we will talk about. If you like yogurt, you want to make sure, and you want to use this as a yogurt cooker, that is a feature that is not on all of the Instant Pots or all of the pressure cookers out there. So that may be something you want to look for if you're buying a new one. And then of course, we're going to use the pressure cook button. So what we're going to do here is press pressure cook. And then, well, isn't that convenient? It's already set at 5 minutes. If I wanted it, say at 7 minutes, I just press this plus button and I adjust up and down. The other thing that is about this pressure cook button, it's right now it's set at less. It has 3 different times that are programmed, and it has memory. So I probably cook something at 7 minutes once on that normal button, and the more button it's at an hour. So if I go to less, it's usually at 5. If you cooked at 4 minutes here, then it probably would remember 4 minutes next time I come to use it. And you just wait a few seconds, and then this guy, it will go to on. It beeps, and then it shows an on. And this is the preheating stage. So this is where this pot is not quite instant. So obviously with this particular recipe, we had a little bit of prep work. It takes longer when I'm talking you through it. but maybe that was 15 minutes of prep work if we weren't talking through it. And you get everything in the pot, and then you set the time and it goes to on. Right now it is heating up. So it's like your oven heating, and it will show on the front of this until it heats up. At some point when it gets heated and it's close to coming to pressure, I'm standing here and paying attention to it, but sometimes I don't notice it depending on what I'm doing in my kitchen. I will start hearing it bubbling and boiling in there. Soon after that, I may see or hear a little bit of steam coming out of the pressure release valve here. And then shortly after that, I will see this pressure indicator, the little silver button. I will see that. Maybe it'll go up and down a couple times and then it'll stay up. And about a minute after that goes up on the Instant Pot, a minute, 30 seconds, the on setting on the front of it will start, it will change. I will hear it beep, and then it will show the cooking time. So in this case, it will show 5 minutes. And then it will start counting down from 5 minutes. And so then we are at that 5 minute of cooking time. So there is some time to warm up, depending on your recipe, how much food you have in the pot. If you have this guy filled up to 2/3 full, it's going to take longer to come up to pressure or to heat up to the pressure point. If you have cold food in there or things that are frozen, it will take longer. If you have a large frozen chuck roast, it will take a lot longer for that to heat up and come up to pressure than if you had one that was, or smaller cuts of meat, or that were at, well, not at room temperature, but cold, but not frozen. Those would take less time, but there is still time involved in it. So you have your recipe prep time, you have your heating up time once it's in there and the lid's on, it's heating up to pressure. Then you have your cooking time. In this case, it's 5 minutes for this recipe. So this, normally in my house, this is when I am cleaning up and getting everything cleaned up and put away. And then you have a pressure release time. And this depends on the recipe. So the pressure release, there are 2 methods, and then a third method that's the combination of those 2. So this particular recipe is a quick release recipe, which is what I like to teach for most of my Instant Pot classes, because it's the one that people are often a little nervous about. It is the one where we move this button from sealing to venting. You can do it with your hand, you can do it with a long spoon, but the steam will come out of the top of the pot at that time. So a quick release is basically using this valve to quickly release the steam from the pot and allow the pressure to drop. A natural release, their second method, is called a natural release. And a natural release of pressure is you just do nothing. You let it sit and it'll come down over time because it doesn't have any, the heat is off, and it will just come down over time. And that can take 10 to 20 minutes. It could take even longer depending on what and how full this pot is. But so you may have additional time for a natural release than you would if you had a quick release recipe. And then your third method, which is a combination of those 2, is where you let it natural release for usually 10 minutes, and then you do a quick release of the rest of the pressure. So sometimes recipes will call for a natural release and then a quick release. That is in the cooking time. So when you are doing a natural release and that's called for in the recipe, you don't want to switch to a quick release simply because you need to get dinner on the table. It's just totally a valid reason, but you want to be aware the reason that they will have a natural release. One reason is because it is a foamy food. So again, your beans and your grains are foamy. So even though the heat is off, they take a while to settle down. So back to the steel cut oats, if you're cooking steel cut oats in there, they foam up while they're cooking. If you do a quick release of those steel cut oats because you need breakfast, you will have steel cut oats coming out of the top of your pressure release valve because they're still foaming. So you want to give it at least 10 minutes to do a natural release. That gives the foamy things time to settle down and stop boiling, cool down a little bit before you release the rest of the pressure. If you have time, you can let those natural release the whole way, and then you won't have any concerns about all that foaming. If you do 10 minutes on steel cut oats and then you do a quick release and you still get a little bit of food particles coming through in that venting, then close it back to sealing and give it a couple more minutes of a natural release before you release more pressure. And then the other reason that you would have a recipe call for a natural release is because it's calculated into the cooking time. So if you have, mostly that's cuts of meat. So pressure cooking is excellent for all those cheap, tough cuts of meat that take longer to cook. The things that are braised or do good with a long, slow cook are really good in the pressure cooker. So ribs, corned beef, pot roast. I do chuck roast in here, pulled pork, like a pork butt roast is really good in here. You'll save a ton of time over doing them in the oven, but they do benefit from letting the pressure release naturally. It helps keep the juices in the meat and it finishes the cooking time. So that's something to be aware of. They can take a while for the pressure to release. So if you have a recipe that calls for a natural release and it's been 20 minutes, you can by all means take off some of the pressure with a quick release, because sometimes that last bit of pressure takes a really long time to pull out. And if you haven't allowed enough time for it, that at that point, after 20 minutes or so, I would just do a quick release if I needed to. So we've talked about the natural release, the quick release. I can hear this guy bubbling. I think it's still showing on the front, but I expect I'm going to see a little bit of steam coming up. I'm going to see this pressure indicator button start coming up and down, and then I'm going to hear the pot beep. And then shortly after that, within a minute, it will start counting down the cooking time from 5 minutes, and it will start counting down from 5 down to 0. When it hits 0 for the cooking time, then it's going to beep and tell you that the cooking's done. So this particular model of pot, and actually most of my Instant Pots, when I turn them to pressure cook, they usually default to the keep warm setting. So I'll just show you that button and show you how you know it's defaulted. Oh, I think that's the wrong one. Sorry. If you go to the front, this keep warm button, and I don't know if you can see it real well, but it is lit up. So the pressure cook button's lit and the keep warm button's lit. That is its default. I can push it now and turn off the keep warm setting if I wanted to. I find the keep warm setting to be useful. So even if some recipes will tell you to turn it on or off, I find it's kind of a personal preference. I use that keep warm setting. If I have that on, and I have a recipe that says to do a quick release, or I'm sorry, if a recipe says to do a natural release of the pressure for 10 minutes, then I can use the keep warm setting it counts up. So when it goes to keep warm, it starts counting up on the timing. So I can use that almost as a timer that I know that the pot has been and keep warm for 10 minutes. Then I know that I have done a natural release for 10 minutes. And at that point, then I can quick release the rest of the pressure. So I use it as a timer. I also use it as a default in case I'm not ready to pull something open when I am done cooking it, then it just stays warm in there, ready to go onto the table. So if anybody has more questions about the keep warm setting, I am more than willing to answer them, but I usually leave it on. If you turn it off and you want to turn it off, that is fine too. One instance is I do my rice in the pressure cooker. So that's when I use that rice setting. I cook my rice in a little bit bigger bowl than this one, in a Pyrex bowl, a 4-cup Pyrex bowl. This is a 2.5-cup bowl. So I have a 4-cup Pyrex bowl. I put 1 cup of rice in the Pyrex bowl, and I put 1.25 cups of water with the rice. And then I put, all of your pots typically come with a trivet. I put this on the trivet in the pot. I put 1 cup of water in. I didn't actually need this. I put 1 cup of water in here. Then I put the trivet down on the bottom. And then the bowl goes on it sits on the bottom. The trivet's standing on its legs right now, but it's not performing well for me. So the trivet goes on the bottom. There's 1 cup of water in here because that water is needed for it to come up to pressure. And then I have the rice and its water in the Pyrex bowl. And then that sits on the trivet. So if this sat directly on the bottom, you would have the heat directly into the rice and it would cook differently. So the trivet helps to distribute the heat better around the rice. You would use a trivet for doing hard-boiled eggs in the pressure cooker. You would want those to sit up on a trivet too. And then usually when this is called a bowl in bowl method or a pot in pot method. You would usually have that sitting on the trivet. You can use that same approach for making desserts in the pressure cooker. I have a little chocolate, like lava cake, individual chocolate lava cakes that I make. Those are on my website if you want that recipe. It's super simple recipe. Those go on a trivet also. They can even be stacked on top of each other when you're making them if you need to fit a few extra into the pot. So anything that can go into your oven is oven safe, can go into your pressure cooker for that pot and pot method. Then, something just crossed my mind, but it went right back out. I started talking about the size of the pressure cooker. So your pressure cooker, I was saying I am using a 6-quart size. That's pretty standard. That fits well for a family of 4 to 6. There is a 3-quart size out in the world. It does not have a huge capacity, but it works really nicely for some things. And it also works really nicely for households of 1 to 2. The 6-quart is good if you like leftovers in your smaller household, so that might be a consideration. It's the most common size that I've seen out there. And then there is an 8-quart size that's available too. So sometimes I use the 8-quart. Well, we're a big family. The 8-quart is, a lot of recipes will, especially when they're calling for like an arm roast, if you do a lot of pot roasts and you like arm roasts, your recipes will often call for boneless, and they're doing that because that fits easier into the size of pot that is for a 6-quart. So that long arm bone on an arm roast does not fit very well, if at all, into the 6-quart size. I can squeeze it into the 8-quart pressure cooker. And so those recipes that are calling for boneless cuts of meat, that's usually because it's what fits easiest into the pot. There is also an oblong shaped one out there in the world. They're hard to find and they're expensive, but they're out there. So if that's something that you do a lot of, that would be something to be aware of as a possible option. So it was just beeping at me. I know that the pressure went up on it. I think maybe I missed my window. Oh, sorry. So the button's up on the top there. And if we look at the front, it started beeping. So now it's counting up. Sorry, it's not super exciting to watch it count down on the screen anyway, but it was at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then it stopped cooking now, and it is now counting up. So we are into the point where it is done pressure cooking, and now we get to release the pressure on it. So I am going to do this from this viewpoint so you can kind of see where the steam is going. The first thing that they tell you to do when you get an Instant Pot, which is good policy with all of the brands, is to basically steam water in it, bring water, only water up to pressure. It's a good way to clean out the pot and get a feel for how it works. One of the things you want to look for is the direction that the steam comes off. It comes off kind of slightly at an angle behind the pot. So if you are concerned about that underneath your cabinets, you should be, or onto your ceiling, you should, one, be very aware of when you're releasing pressure on things that are foaming. So if you are doing quick releases on recipes that tell you to do a natural release and you get stuff on your ceiling, that is part of the reason why. So you've now had that lesson. The other thing you can do is you can hold the towel up. I would wrap, and you can also be very aware of where you are cooking with this at. So once it's come up to pressure, once it is hot, I do not recommend moving this pot, but you can wrap a towel around your arm and you can hold this about 12 inches above that vent and capture the steam that way. You're usually going to be standing in front of the pot. I'm kind of behind it right now, and like in the worst spot you could possibly be at. But what I'm going to do is it's going to go right into this camera is where it's going to go today. So the steam's coming off and back from the pot. You can probably see a little bit of that. So if you wanted to, you could hold a towel over that steam vent so it's not pointing at whatever you want to avoid it pointing at. Mine's starting to sputter a little bit, which to me means that it looks clear, but there might be little food particles coming through there if it's sputtering. So something to be aware of. If I felt like I was seeing it sputter more, then I might move it back and close the valve. And I just do that with my finger, but you can do this with a spoon too. You can also set this guy and start it if you have a good vent on your oven or your stovetop, and you're able to safely set this up and you're not using the stovetop for anything else. You can turn that vent on right before you vent your pressure cooker and pull that steam out that way. So that would be another option. What I don't want you doing is don't put the towel directly on that vent. That is a big no-no. This is the pressure release to the pot, the main pressure release. There are emergency pressure points releasing of this pot. So when it is trying to release pressure, if you block that main one, it will start pushing that gasket out and start trying to get the pressure out in other ways. So that never ever block that vent by putting a towel on it or anything else on it, but you can hold it like 12 inches above and catch the pressure that way. So the pressure, I see no more steam coming out and that button has dropped there. So if that button, I didn't talk about this, but the other safety feature that's on here is if that button is up, you cannot get this lid open. It is locked. There is no way to open the lid. So if somebody comes in your kitchen, it says, oh, I wonder what's in the pot, and tries to open it and it's under pressure, they cannot get that pot open. The lid will be locked closed. But now the pressure button is down. I can turn the lid, and then I'm gonna set the lid up. I'm gonna steam out that camera probably, so we'll see what's going on. And I'll switch the camera here so you can see what's in there. This rest, I was doing really well at remembering which was which. So now it's still on keep warm. Yeah, I got a lot of steam on that camera, so I might have to, I'm gonna hit cancel on the front. I might have to give it a little bath here. I don't know if it'll work. See if it works. Oh yeah. Sarah and I had the settings all perfect, and now I just moved it. So if I wanted to, if I think that this sauce is too thin, and the recipe is written this way. So if you feel like the sauce is too thin or your noodles are not quite cooked far enough, this is what these chicken breasts look like, or these chicken thighs look like. You can break these apart. At this point, if you wanted to eat these or cut them into slices, you could do that. Let's see how the pasta is cooked. It looks really nice to me. I'm not going to do it with my finger because it's going to be hot. Slice one open. I could tell you anything probably, but I think that's cut really nicely, or it cut really nice. It's perfectly cooked. I am not opposed to this thickness, but if you want this sauce thicker, you can turn the front back to saute. I would do it on, I would do that. This is the thickness of it. I think that's really nice. I don't know if you can see that totally, but I like that thickness. And then at this point, you would add the arugula in to the pot, which I'm not gonna, I guess I could, but you would just toss that arugula in. You could close the lid. Spinach would work really well too. And chop it a little bit before you throw it in, and then toss it up. You can put the lid on it for like a minute to help it soften. You could even add cheese to this if you wanted. I think it looks really nice how it is. And you could skip the green stuff too if you wanted, but I think it will be great with the arugula in there. So that is basically the recipe. So your tricks of using or knowing the pot is mainly you're going to use the pressure cooking button up and down for time. You're going to mainly use it on a high setting, and your tricks are going to be to, if you brown in there, you want to make sure you deglaze the pot so nothing is stuck on it and you'll get fewer errors. And then a lot of things with the lid, making sure that your seal is in properly, that this vent is clean, and that you have the top set to sealing when you're trying to cook, and that you have liquid always in your pot when you're trying to bring it up to pressure. So those are like the main tricks that I have to making sure you're successful with the pressure cooking. And then the rest of it is knowing good recipes. So I think I gave a few, you know what I did not do? I have notes for this class. I forgot to send them to you, Sarah, so I will send them to you and you can send them out to everybody after class. In those notes, I have a couple references for, I have a couple references in there for cookbooks that I like, but I strongly recommend using the library, checking out, go to Amazon, find what's popular, then check them out from the library. There are all sorts of cookbooks, all sorts of styles of cooking. What works for your family, there's like meatloaf and pot roast type of cookbooks, and then there's cookbooks that focus on Mediterranean, Indian, all sorts of different healthy types, grains, all of it is out there. I really like for websites, I try to recommend to people to start with cooking from a cookbook, so you can kind of get a feel, and then the world is there's so many choices on the internet, it can be very confusing. I find Instagram and Pinterest to be almost confusing for recipes, but they are a good source. There is a Facebook page for Instant Pot users that is also a good resource. There is a lot of activity on it, and you will need to turn off your settings for reminders because you'll see so much on there. But it's something that you can go in there and search for almost anything and find tips on there. Then the other thing, the one website that I do recommend is called hippressurecooking.com. Her site has a lot of, she's been pressure cooking for a long time. She has stovetop recipes all the way up to, she tests and tests all the different Instant Pot models and different brands. So she's got information on specific models, and she has cooking tables on there. So all sorts of different vegetables, meats. She has frozen cooking tables on there. And I have found her timings to be a very good resource. Those tables are also in some of her cookbooks. So if you like things on paper rather than online, she's got some of those printed in her cookbooks too. So I think she's a good source, but I do like using the library to try out recipe books before committing to anything and then going from there. So if anybody has questions about recipes or anything here that we're talking about, this is, I'm kind of wrapping up. I'm going to look at my notes here and make sure I covered everything. There's so many things to talk about. I don't cover everything in this class. I always, after class, I'm like, oh, I forget to talk about whatever. But I think we've covered all of the basics. And then beyond this, there's some very specifics. If anybody has any specific questions, I am here for that. I will share a story while I'm looking. Is I was camping with Boy Scouts this weekend. So me and 3 other adult leaders, all of whom are men, married men, and they don't know what I do, that I teach these classes, and they started talking about their Instant Pots and their recipes in the Instant Pots, and I was just sitting there listening to them, just like laughing. Like the one guy, I mean, they were sharing all their recipes, but the one, I need to try one of them. He said he puts in a jar of pasta sauce, a package of spaghetti, and a package of meatballs. And I don't know if he adds water to it or not. I'd have to think you probably would want some water in there, but he just turns it on. I don't know if he's using spaghetti or penne pasta, because I find that the penne works better. But that's what he does. And then he cooks it for 5 minutes with the meatballs and the pasta and the pasta sauce. And so what we did tonight was kind of an upgraded version of that, but it can be as simple as just dumping everything in, turning on the pot, finding recipes that are good for that. And then you can take it, and this is kind of like a little bit fancier, but still a really good way to get a good dinner on the table. So, and I still didn't look at what my notes were here. So I think we have talked about almost everything here on my list, other than recipe ideas. But soups are really good. And the other thing I love this for in the summer specifically is it doesn't heat up the kitchen. So there's some heat with it, but it's mostly contained in here. So instead of turning the stovetop on, when I am looking for making meals in the summer, I will often go, is there a way to do that in the pressure cooker, or is there a pressure cooker recipe I can use to make that so I don't have to turn on the stove? So that it is good for the summer. I mean, it's really good for soups and all the winter things, but it's also great for summer. You can prep your meat for for barbecuing or all of that stuff in here instead of having to have the oven on. So I think that's it. If anyone has questions, I am open to them. And I think I have covered almost everything that I have on my list. So.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Andrea.
You're welcome.
Excuse me. Let's see. We just have a couple comments. Thank you for the tips and the recipe. So simple and easy in one pot. And it was very comprehensive. You were very good at, like going through all the different steps and stuff. It looks delicious. I wish I could stick a fork in there and try it.
I know. I'm kind of surprised I'm not doing that right now.
Well, before we go, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to type them in. Otherwise, I'm going to give out the secret word, which is recipe. All in lowercase. You can enter that in on Beanstack as an activity, and then you will get a virtual ticket for our grand prize raffles. So you do have to go in and choose which basket you want to put your virtual ticket in, but this will give you an extra one. So thank you for sticking with us to the very end. Not seeing any other questions. I think you must have answered everything during the program, which was great. So again, if anyone does have any other questions, you can email them to us. We'll pass them on to Andrea, and we'll be passing on those extra tips and notes that she mentioned. So we'll be emailing those to you. And then if you are interested, we will have this video up on our website for, I believe it's a week, 2 weeks. It
yeah,
varies.
something like that. I don't know what we agreed to. Yeah, at least a week.
Yeah. So definitely, if you wanted to rewatch any parts of that, it will be available on our virtual programs page. So thank you very much for coming. I hope everyone enjoyed the program and have a good evening. Bye now.
Thank you. Good night.